The first time I realized the HOA had installed cameras pointing straight into my home, I was standing in my kitchen in yesterday's clothes, holding cold coffee, and waving at a blinking red light that definitely hadn't been there the night before. I waved because my brain hadn't caught up yet. I waved because it felt absurd. I waved because somewhere behind that lens, someone was watching me wave back at their mistake. I live on the edge of our neighborhood, the last house before the road dips into trees and disappears toward the county line. That location is the reason I bought this place in the first place. No houses across from me. No foot traffic. No shared driveway. Just my home, my porch, my windows, and the quiet assumption that when I closed my curtains, the world stayed on the outside. That illusion died the moment I stepped onto my front porch and counted 3 brand-new black domes mounted on the HOA light poles. One angled directly at my living room windows. One pointed toward my backyard fence. The third was tilted slightly upward, catching my bedroom window just enough that I knew it wasn't accidental. They hadn't even tried to hide it. I stood there longer than I should have, staring up at the nearest camera. The red indicator light pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Somewhere, someone was either watching live or recording everything. My coffee went untouched. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ignored it, because I already knew what it would be. The HOA group chat had woken up early. The message was cheerful. Too cheerful. It announced a community safety enhancement initiative and thanked residents for their patience during minor infrastructure upgrades. No mention of cameras. No mention of privacy. Just a smiling emoji and a reminder that the HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked the property line slowly, counting angles. I knew cameras. My old job had trained me to notice sidelines, blind spots, and intent. These weren't general security cameras meant to monitor entrances or common areas. These were positioned with precision. Whoever planned this had studied my house. That's when anger finally caught up with disbelief. I went back inside and pulled the blinds shut, every single one, even though it was mid-morning and sunlight usually filled the place. The house felt wrong instantly, darker and smaller, like it was holding its breath with me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the HOA bylaws, the same PDF I'd skimmed a dozen times during past dispute. Landscaping, parking, fence height, noise complaints. I scrolled fast, searching for keywords. Camera, surveillance, recording. Nothing. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a private message from Linda, the HOA board president. She liked to sign her emails with her full name and credentials, as if running a suburban HOA required a law degree and a moral badge. Hope you noticed the new safety improvements. Let us know if you have any concerns. I laughed, sharp and humorless, the sound echoing too loudly in my own living room. Concerns didn't even begin to cover it. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Eventually I sent something short and calm, because I knew better than to show my hand early. Can you clarify why HOA cameras are facing directly into my home and private yard? The response came back faster than I expected. They're positioned to monitor community-owned infrastructure. If your home appears in the background, that's incidental. Incidental. Like a footnote. Like a coincidence. I stood up and paced. Every step across my living room floor felt exposed now. I caught myself glancing toward the windows even though the blinds were closed. That was the real damage, I realized. Not the footage. Not the recordings. It was the way my own house suddenly felt like a stage. I grabbed my jacket and walked outside again, this time determined to document everything. I took photos from every angle, zoomed in on serial numbers, captured the exact tilt of each lens. A neighbor across the street pretended not to watch me while watering his lawn. His hose paused mid-air as he followed my movement. "You see the cameras?" I asked him, not bothering with small talk. He hesitated, then nodded. "They said it was for package theft." I looked at him, then at the empty road behind my house. "From the trees." He shrugged. I don't ask questions. That seemed to be the theme of the neighborhood. Don't ask. Don't look too closely. Don't be the problem resident. I'd already crossed that line years ago, and the HOA had never forgiven me for it. By noon, I had emails drafted, screenshots saved, and timestamps logged. I called the HOA management company and got routed through 3 extensions before landing in voicemail. I left a polite message, the kind that sounds reasonable on the surface but carries a warning underneath. By afternoon, my blinds felt suffocating. I opened one just enough to let light in and immediately froze when I saw the red dot flicker brighter, as if responding to the movement. That was it. Any lingering doubt vanished. These cameras weren't passive. They were reactive. I closed the blind again and sat on the couch, my heart beating harder than it should have. The violation settled deep, heavier than anger now. This wasn't about rules or fees or petty authority. This was about control. About watching. About reminding someone that privacy existed only at the HOA's discretion. At 4:30, Linda replied again. We can discuss your concerns at the board meeting. Until then, please refrain from interfering with HOA property. I read it twice, slow and careful. Interfering. I hadn't touched a thing. I hadn't even complained publicly. And yet, the tone had shifted. The smile was gone. This wasn't reassurance. It was a warning. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, already feeling the shape of what was coming next. I knew the type of people who installed cameras without consent and called it incidental. I knew how far they were willing to go once challenged. And I knew one more thing with absolute certainty. They had no idea who they were watching. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart racing for no good reason until I remembered the cameras. The house felt different in daylight, not safer, just more exposed. I lay still for a moment, listening, half expecting to hear something mechanical hum to life. Nothing did, which somehow made it worse. I forced myself to move normally. Shower. Coffee. Breakfast. I refused to let them dictate my routine, even as I caught myself angling my body away from windows out of pure instinct. When I finally stepped outside, phone in hand, I felt that same invisible pressure, like eyes following me from somewhere just out of reach. The cameras were still there, of course. Same angles. Same red pulse. I recorded a slow panoramic video from my driveway, narrating quietly to myself so I wouldn't forget details later. Time. Date. Exact positions. I noted the HOA light pole numbers and the distance to my property line. The law didn't care about feelings, only facts, and I intended to give it plenty. By mid-morning, the HOA group chat had turned restless. Someone posted a blurry photo of a car door left open overnight. Another complained about teenagers walking through the neighborhood after dark. Then Linda chimed in, praising the cameras again and reminding everyone that safety sometimes required compromise. That word hit wrong. Compromise implied consent. I hadn't given any. I replied publicly this time, keeping it calm and almost friendly. Can you explain why the cameras are positioned to capture inside private homes rather than entrances or common areas? The typing indicator popped up almost immediately, then vanished. A minute later, Linda responded without answering the question. If you have legal concerns, please contact the HOA attorney. Public speculation causes unnecessary panic. Panic. Another carefully chosen word. I wasn't panicking. I was documenting. Still, the message did what it was meant to do. The chat went quiet. No one backed me up. No one asked follow-up questions. Silence can be louder than opposition if you know how to listen to it. That was when I decided to stop relying on the HOA to explain itself. I called the city's code compliance office first. Cameras on public poles but aimed into private property lived in a gray area, one that depended heavily on intent and recording capability. The woman on the phone sounded tired but attentive. She asked me to email photos and file a formal complaint. I did both before the call even ended. Next was a privacy rights attorney I'd consulted years ago over a separate issue. I left a message, brief but specific, and included the phrase continuous residential surveillance without consent. Lawyers tend to return calls faster when you speak their language. By early afternoon, something shifted. I noticed it the moment I pulled into my driveway after a grocery run. One of the cameras had moved. Not by much, just a few degrees, but enough that its focus now sat squarely on my front door instead of my living room window. They were adjusting in response to me. That realization sent a chill through me, colder than anger. It meant someone was actively monitoring, checking footage, making decisions in real time. This wasn't a passive system quietly recording for later review. This was deliberate. I took more photos, hands steady, breathing slow. I refused to rush. Rushed mistakes were exactly what people like Linda counted on. An hour later, I got an email from the HOA management company. It was longer than Linda's messages and wrapped in legal padding, but the core message was simple. The cameras were installed under the HOA's authority to protect shared asset. Any incidental capture of private property was unintentional. Tampering with HOA equipment would result in fines. They still hadn't denied the recording. I forwarded the email to the city office and added it to my growing folder. Then I sat down and waited, because sometimes the smartest move is letting people reveal themselves further. They didn't make me wait long. Just before sunset, 2 HOA board members walked up my driveway without calling first. Linda wasn't with them, which told me everything I needed to know. She preferred confrontation with an audience or through a screen. This was a pressure visit. I stepped onto the porch and stayed there, keeping the threshold between us. They smiled like people delivering bad news politely. "We wanted to clear the air," one of them said, hands folded in front of him. "There's been some misunderstanding." I gestured vaguely toward the nearest camera. "There's been some filming." He chuckled, as if that was clever. "No one is watching you specifically." The lie slid out too easily. "Then adjust the cameras," I said. The other board member shifted, eyes flicking up toward the pole. "That's not necessary." "Then remove them." Silence stretched. I could almost hear Linda's voice in their heads, instructing them not to concede anything. "We'd prefer to handle this internally," the first one said. "Escalation benefits no one." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You escalated it the moment you pointed a lens at my bedroom." That finally rattled them. The second man cleared his throat and tried a different angle, lowering his voice. "Look, between us, Linda thinks you're difficult. She believes transparency discourages bad behavior." I let that hang there for a moment. "So the cameras are punitive." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Too late. The damage was done. "Thanks for clarifying," I said, already stepping back inside. "Please leave." They didn't argue. They walked away faster than they'd arrived, and I watched them retreat through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. The camera light pulsed brighter as they passed beneath it, as if acknowledging a job well done. That night, my attorney called me back. After I explained everything, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked one simple question that made my stomach drop. "Do you know where the footage is stored?" I stared at the dark window across the room. "No. That's a problem," he said. "Because if they're storing or transmitting video of your private spaces, this stops being an HOA issue and starts being something much bigger." I slept badly, dreams fractured and shallow, waking at every sound. Sometime near dawn, I checked my phone and saw a notification time-stamped just after midnight. An HOA system alert, accidentally sent to the group chat, then quickly deleted. Camera calibration in progress. They weren't backing down. They were digging in. And I knew then, with absolute clarity, that this wasn't going to end quietly. By the third day, the cameras felt less like objects and more like a presence. Not threatening in an obvious way, not dramatic, just constant. The kind of pressure that seeps into your thoughts until you can't remember what it felt like before it was there. I started the morning by reopening every blind in the house. Not because I felt brave, but because I refused to live like I was hiding. Sunlight flooded the rooms, sharp and honest, and for a brief moment it almost felt normal again. Then I caught the red reflection in the glass, and remembered why my shoulders were tight. I moved through the house deliberately. Slow. Measured. If someone was watching, I wanted them to see nothing worth reacting to. No pacing. No agitation. Just a person existing in their own space. It was petty, maybe, but it was also control, and control mattered now. At 9:15, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. "This is Linda," she said, clipped and formal, like we were already in a meeting that I hadn't agreed to attend. "We need to talk." "I've been talking," I said. "You've been avoiding answers." A pause. I imagined her somewhere comfortable, coffee in hand, posture rigid with certainty. "You're making serious accusations. That has consequences. So does filming people in their homes." Her breath sharpened. "No one is filming you. You adjusted the cameras. They're calibrated. At midnight." Another pause, longer this time. She recovered quickly. "We're within our rights." I leaned against the counter and looked straight at the nearest lens through the window. "Then you shouldn't have a problem putting that in writing." The silence stretched until it was uncomfortable even through the phone. "We'll discuss this at the board meeting," she said finally. "I won't be there," I replied. That landed harder than anything else I'd said so far. "Excuse me. I've already escalated it," I said. "You wanted to handle it internally." I declined. She hung up without another word. By late morning, the neighborhood felt different. Cars slowed as they passed my house. Curtains across the street shifted, then stilled. People didn't wave. They didn't frown either. They watched, careful not to be obvious about it, as if proximity to controversy was contagious. At 11, a city vehicle parked down the block. I didn't rush out. I waited until the inspector stepped onto the sidewalk and started taking photos of the poles. That mattered. It meant this wasn't dismissed as a nuisance complaint. It meant someone official saw what I saw. I walked out then, keeping my hands visible, my voice calm. "Morning," I said. He nodded. "You the homeowner?" "Yes." He gestured upward. "You file the complaint?" I did. We walked the line together. He asked questions I'd already prepared answers for. Who installed them? When? What areas were visible? Whether I'd been notified. I showed him my photos, the timestamps, the HOA emails. His expression tightened slightly as he scrolled. "These aren't typical placements," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "They're not." He didn't promise anything. Inspectors never do. But when he left, he took more photos than he'd arrived with, and that felt like progress. It didn't take long for the HOA to notice. By mid-afternoon, Linda had sent out a mass email. The subject line was aggressive in its politeness. Community update regarding surveillance equipment. She framed it as clarification, as reassurance, as transparency. She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't have to. The language was sharp enough that everyone knew who the problem resident was. She wrote that false reports to the city undermined community trust. That external interference could delay safety initiatives. That cooperation was essential. She ended with a warning about fines for harassment of board members. I laughed out loud when I read it, the sound startling in the quiet house. Harassment. For wanting my bedroom off camera. That was when the twist came, subtle and easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. A neighbor messaged me privately. Not one I knew well. Just someone 3 houses down who usually kept to himself. His message was short. "Hey. Just so you know, Linda asked me if your back windows face the pool area. Thought that was weird." I stared at the screen. The pool was nowhere near my property. There was no reason for her to ask that unless she was trying to justify something retroactively. Mapping sightlines. Building a story. I thanked him and asked one careful question. "Did she ask anyone else?" The reply came a few minutes later. She asked a few of us about our camera views too. Said she needed context. Context. Another soft word covering something hard. I forwarded that message to my attorney. His response was immediate this time. Do not engage further. Let them keep talking. So I did. I stopped responding. No emails. No messages. No corrections. I let the HOA narrative spin itself out in public, watched as Linda overexplained, contradicted earlier statements, and shifted justifications depending on her audience. And then, just after dinner, the real mistake happened. I got a notification from my cloud storage. A shared folder had been added to my account by mistake, then removed seconds later. But seconds were enough. Inside was a single video file, labeled by date and time. It was my backyard. Not just the fence line. Not just the edge. The whole space, clear and unambiguous, recorded in daylight. I could see my patio furniture. My grill. The door to my bedroom. There was no sound, but there didn't need to be. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. A strange calm settled over me instead, cold and precise. I downloaded the file, duplicated it, backed it up twice, and saved the metadata before the link vanished entirely. Then I sat back and let the reality of it sink in. They weren't just watching. They were storing. And now, without meaning to, they'd handed me proof. I looked out the window again, this time without flinching, and met the camera's unblinking stare. Whatever this had been before, it wasn't a power play anymore. It was a liability. And they had no idea how badly they'd miscalculated. The calm didn't last forever. It never does. It sharpens first, becomes something useful, then turns into fuel. I spent the morning organizing evidence the way some people organize photograph. Folder by folder. Date by date. Screenshots of emails. Messages from neighbors. Photos of camera angles before and after adjustment. And now, the video. I watched it once, all the way through, forcing myself not to look away even when my chest tightened. It was worse than I expected, not because of what it showed, but because of how casually it showed it. My life, framed and centered, recorded like it belonged to someone else. By noon, my attorney called and told me to stop everything. Stop collecting? I asked. No, he said. Stop reacting. They're past the point of fixing this quietly. Now we let them hang themselves. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling again, the same spot I'd stared at days earlier, except this time the fear wasn't there. In its place was something steadier. Patience. That patience was tested less than an hour later. 2 HOA trucks pulled up outside my house, parking deliberately close to the curb, logos turned outward like badges. I watched from the window as 3 people stepped out. Linda this time. Flanked. Confident. Dressed like a woman walking into a victory lap instead of a disaster she didn't yet see. I stepped outside before they could knock. Afternoon, I said. Linda smiled, tight and rehearsed. We're here to inspect the perimeter. There have been complaints. About what? I asked. Obstructions, she said smoothly. And interference with HOA assets. I followed her gaze upward. The cameras loomed above us, quiet and smug. You mean the ones illegally recording my property? Her smile thinned. That's your opinion. I took a step closer, not aggressive, just deliberate. No. That's your footage. The air changed instantly. One of the board members stiffened. Linda's eyes flicked, just for a fraction of a second, before locking back onto mine. I don't know what you think you saw, she said. I didn't see it, I replied. I have it. Silence fell hard. Even the street felt still, like it was holding its breath. That's impossible, she said too fast. You shared it, I said. Accidentally. Cloud permissions can be tricky. Her jaw tightened. She recovered quickly, but not fast enough. The crack had shown. We'll need that file, she said. I laughed then, a genuine sound this time. You really won't. One of the other board members stepped in, voice low. This doesn't need to get ugly. I looked at him. It already is. You just didn't know which side of it you were on. Linda straightened her shoulders. We'll have our attorney contact you. He already has, I said. That landed like a dropped plate. The group backed off without another word, retreating to their trucks, their earlier confidence replaced with something closer to urgency. Linda didn't look back as she got in, which told me more than anything she could have said. That evening, the HOA email went out. This one wasn't cheerful. It wasn't reassuring. It was defensive, dense with legal language, and carefully vague. It announced a temporary suspension of camera monitoring pending review. Not removal. Not apology. Suspension. The cameras stayed lit. My phone buzzed nonstop. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had questions. Some were cautious. Some were curious. A few were angry, not at me, but at the realization that if cameras could be pointed into my house, they could be pointed into theirs too. One message stood out. Did they record audio too? I hadn't even considered that. The thought made my stomach drop all over again. I forwarded the question to my attorney. His response came back fast and sharp. If they did, that crosses into criminal territory. That night, something new happened. The red light on the nearest camera went dark. Just that one. The others stayed on. I stood on my porch watching it, heart pounding, not because I was scared, but because I recognized the move. This wasn't compliance. It was damage control. Someone was trying to minimize exposure without admitting fault. Too late. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. HOA letterhead. Legal tone. A demand for the immediate return or destruction of any proprietary footage obtained without authorization. I read it slowly, then laughed again, shaking my head. They wanted their evidence back. I sent a single response, approved by my attorney and stripped of emotion. The footage is preserved for legal review. Do not contact me directly again. That afternoon, a second city vehicle arrived. This one stayed longer. Measurements were taken. Notes written. Calls made. I overheard fragments of conversation through my open window. Words like expectation of privacy, field of view, improper placement. When the inspector finally left, he didn't nod politely this time. He looked grim. By sunset, the HOA website went offline. No explanation. No notice. Just gone. That was the moment I knew the balance had tipped. Whatever internal story Linda had been telling herself, whatever confidence she'd wrapped around those cameras, it was unraveling now. Quietly. Publicly. Irreversibly. I stood in my living room as the light faded, blinds open, windows bare, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel watched. I felt waited on. And I knew Chapter 5 wouldn't be about whether the HOA had crossed a line. It would be about how far past it they'd gone. Even if no one said it out loud. There were the people who still believed the HOA when it claimed everything was under control, and then there were the people who had started closing their blinds a little earlier than usual. The cameras were still there when I woke up, but they looked different now. Less confident. One stayed dark. Another twitched slightly, adjusting in tiny increments, as if whoever controlled it couldn't decide where it was allowed to look anymore. That hesitation told me more than any apology ever could. At 8:43, my attorney forwarded me something that made me sit up straight. An emergency board meeting had been scheduled for that evening. Not announced publicly. Not posted on the HOA site, which was still offline. An internal meeting. Closed session. Damage containment. They were scrambling. I spent the morning doing something that felt almost absurd given the circumstances. Cleaned my house. Not because it needed it, but because routine grounds me. Vacuum lines in the carpet. Dishes stacked neatly. Windows wiped clean. If this ended up in court, I wanted the footage they already had to show nothing but a normal person living a normal life. No chaos. No instability. No narrative they could twist. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I didn't answer it right away. I checked the peephole and saw Linda standing there alone this time, holding a folder tight against her chest like armor. No entourage. No trucks. No witnesses. She'd invited herself. I opened the door and stepped out, closing it behind me. This isn't a good idea, I said calmly. She inhaled sharply, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm not here as board president. I waited. I'm here to resolve this, she said. You had several chances to do that. She nodded as if agreeing with a reasonable colleague. Mistakes were made. Plural. Passive. Bloodless. What do you want? I asked. She glanced up at the camera above us, then back at me. We want to avoid escalation. I couldn't help it. I laughed again, short and incredulous. You installed surveillance pointed into my home, lied about it, stored footage, and threatened me. This is escalation. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressure we're under. That sounds like a you problem. Her voice dropped. The city is asking questions. Residents are asking questions. We need this to go away. There it was. Not accountability. Not regret. Convenience. I'm not the one who made it a problem, I said. I'm the one who documented it. She shifted her weight, then opened the folder and held it out slightly, as if offering a peace treaty. We can remove the cameras. Quietly. Issue a statement about repositioning for better coverage. No names. No blame. And the footage? She hesitated. Just long enough. It would be deleted. I met her eyes. You'd have to prove that. She exhaled slowly, frustration leaking through. What do you want? The question was sharper than she intended. It wasn't an offer anymore. It was a calculation. I want the cameras removed, I said. All of them. I want a written admission that they were improperly placed. I want confirmation of where footage was stored and who had access. And I want the HOA to stop contacting me except through counsel. Her expression hardened. That's not reasonable. That's reality. She stared at me for a long moment, then closed the folder without handing it over. If you proceed with legal action, the HOA will defend itself aggressively. I hope you do, I said. Discovery will be fascinating. That word landed. I saw it in her eyes the moment she realized I wasn't bluffing. Discovery meant emails, texts, internal chats, footage logs, metadata. It meant everything she thought was invisible becoming painfully clear. She stepped back. This conversation never happened, she said. I smiled. Then you won't mind if I mention it. She turned and walked away without another word. That evening, while the HOA board met behind closed doors, my attorney called me with an update that shifted the ground again. The city referred this to the state privacy office, he said. They're opening an inquiry. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. What does that mean? It means subpoenas, he said. And fines. Possibly criminal exposure if audio recording is confirmed. After we hung up, I stood by the window and watched the sky darken, the cameras silhouetted against it like relics from a bad idea. Lights flicked on in houses up and down the street. Curtains moved. Phones glowed behind glass. People were talking now. At 9:22, a mass email went out to every resident. Due to unforeseen concerns, the HOA has decided to suspend all camera operations indefinitely while we conduct a comprehensive review. Indefinitely. Still no apology. Still no admission. Just another attempt to pause time. It didn't work. Within minutes, replies flooded the thread. Questions. Demands. Screenshot. Someone asked for a copy of the contract with the camera vendor. Someone else asked who approved the placement. Another asked how long footage had been retained. Linda didn't respond. Instead, the email thread was locked. That was the last quiet move they made. Because an hour later, my attorney forwarded me something else. A whistleblower email. Anonymous. Internal. Sent to the state office and copied to him. It included installation diagrams, internal messages, and a line that made my stomach twist, even as it confirmed everything I already knew. Let's keep the cameras trained on his property. If he knows he's being watched, he'll behave. I sat down hard on the couch, the weight of it finally hitting me. Not fear. Not anger. Just the stark clarity of it. This had never been about safety. It had been about punishment. I looked at the cameras one last time before going to bed, their red lights finally all dark now, and felt something close to pity for the people who thought this was a good idea. But the damage was already alive and moving on its own. Silence from the HOA didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like the quiet you hear before a structure collapses. The state privacy office didn't move loudly. It moved precisely. My attorney explained it over a calm phone call that somehow made everything feel heavier. Investigators had requested records. Not summaries. Not explanations. Raw data. Installation contract. Access logs. Storage credentials. Internal communications tied to the decision to deploy surveillance equipment. The kind of requests that don't come with friendly deadlines. They're treating this as intentional, he said. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd first noticed the blinking red light days ago. Because it was. Yes, he replied. And because someone wrote it down. That whistleblower email had changed everything. It stripped away plausible deniability and replaced it with motive, intent, purpose. The three words every regulator looks for when deciding how hard to hit. By mid-morning, the HOA's attorney finally reached out. Not Linda. Not a board member. A firm with a name long enough to imply seriousness. The email was stiff, cautious, and overly polite. They requested a conversation to discuss resolution options and expressed concern about escalating misunderstandings. I forwarded it to my attorney without responding. He replied for me an hour later. One sentence. All communication must occur through counsel. That boundary mattered more than anything else right then. Kept the emotional games out and forced everything into recordable space. While the lawyers circled, the neighborhood shifted again. This time, openly. A woman 2 houses down stopped me while I was checking the mail. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't glance around first. Did they really record inside your yard? She asked. Yes. For how long? I don't know yet. She shook her head slowly. They told us it was just entrances. Others joined in before I could retreat. A man with a stroller. A couple I recognized but had never spoken to. Questions overlapped. Anger surfaced. Someone mentioned their kids. Someone else mentioned changing clothes near windows. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't editorialize. I told them only what I could prove. By evening, the HOA board had lost control of the narrative entirely. Someone leaked the whistleblower email to the resident. I didn't do it. I didn't have to. It appeared in my inbox alongside half a dozen forwarded messages, each subject line more alarmed than the last. People weren't arguing anymore. They were demanding. And for the first time since this started, the pressure wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at Linda. That night, an emergency notice appeared taped to the community bulletin board. Printed. Old school. A special meeting scheduled for the next day. Open forum. Linda's name was still at the top. She didn't show. Instead, the HOA's attorney stood in front of a room packed far beyond fire code limits and spoke carefully about procedural reviews and temporary leadership adjustments. No one listened. People shouted questions. Some cried. Others laughed in disbelief. When my name came up, it wasn't with hostility. It was with apology. I stayed quiet. This wasn't my stage. This was theirs. The following morning, the state office made its move. Formal notices were issued. Not to the HOA as a vague entity, but to specific board members. Personal responsibility. Personal exposure. The kind of letters that don't get forwarded casually. Linda resigned before noon. No speech. No explanation. Just a short notice posted online by the management company, citing personal reasons and wishing her well. It fooled no one. By afternoon, the HOA attorney requested mediation. By evening, they were talking settlement. Real settlement. Cameras removed permanently. Written acknowledgments drafted. compliance audits promised, third-party oversight. And still, that wasn't the end. Because consequences don't stop at policy. Late that night, as I sat alone in my living room, blinds open, lights on, phone buzzing with updates I barely read, my attorney called one last time. "There's something else," he said. I closed my eyes. "Of course there is." The state investigator asked if you'd be willing to provide a statement regarding retaliatory intent. I didn't answer right away. A statement would mean going on record, naming names, confirming that this wasn't incompetence, but punishment. It would close the door on quiet fixes forever. "Take your time," he added. "But understand this. If you don't speak, someone else will." I looked around my house, my real house, the one that had felt like a stage, then a cage, and now finally felt like mine again. "I'll do it," I said. After we hung up, I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street. No blinking lights, no hidden lenses, just stillness. Chapter 6 wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the moment power changed hands. And I knew Chapter 7 wouldn't be about what they'd done to me. It would be about what they'd done to themselves. The fallout didn't explode. It spread. That was the part no one warns you about. There's no single moment where everything collapses in on itself. Instead, consequences move like water through cracks, seeping into places no one thought to seal. The morning after Linda resigned, the HOA tried to act like an organization again. Emails went out signed by an interim board chair I'd barely heard of. Calm language, reassuring tone, promises of transparency. The kind of messaging you send when you're hoping people are too tired to keep being angry. They weren't. By lunchtime, residents were demanding records. Not summaries. Not statements. Records. Meeting minutes. Vendor contract. Voting logs. Who approved what, when, and why no one had stopped it. The interim chair sent one reply before going quiet. "We are consulting with counsel regarding document requests." That was the sound of the clock running out. My attorney called in the afternoon to prep me for my statement. He didn't rush me. He didn't coach me. He just asked questions and listened while I answered, stopping occasionally to ask me to clarify something small that suddenly felt very big. "When did you first believe the cameras were punitive?" he asked. I thought back to that moment on my porch, Linda's voice echoing through her messengers. When they said transparency discourages bad behavior. He paused. "That's good. That's motive." We went through everything slowly. The placement, the adjustments, the late-night calibration, the shared folder, the internal email, each detail stacked neatly, forming a picture no one could dismiss as coincidence anymore. When we finished, he exhaled. "This is solid." It didn't feel solid. It felt heavy. That evening, the neighborhood meeting reconvened, this time without Linda's name anywhere on the agenda. The room was packed again. Hotter, louder, less polite. Someone stood up and asked how long the cameras had been operational. Another demanded to know if footage had been shared with third parties. Someone else asked why the board thought it was acceptable to surveil one resident as an example. That one landed hard. The interim chair tried to redirect, but the room wouldn't let him. People talked over each other. Voices cracked. Trust, once broken, doesn't wait its turn to be heard. I sat in the back and listened. No one looked at me like I was the problem anymore. They looked at me like the warning. By the end of the meeting, 3 more board members had stepped down. Not ceremoniously. Not bravely. They just left early and didn't come back. The next day, the State Privacy Office issued its preliminary findings. Intentional residential surveillance, improper placement, inadequate consent, inadequate data handling, retaliatory use of monitoring equipment. Each phrase read colder than the last. The HOA's attorney stopped talking about mediation and started talking about compliance timelines, external audits, mandatory training, policy overhauls. And still, the questions didn't stop. Local media caught wind of it sometime that afternoon. A reporter called my phone. I let it go to voicemail. Another emailed. Then another. The story had legs. Suburban abuse of power. Surveillance overreach. A board president who thought watching someone would make them fall in line. It was almost cliché. I gave one statement, written, approved by counsel, stripped of drama. Just facts. Just dates. Just actions. It spread anyway. That night, I sat alone again, scrolling through messages from neighbors. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Some admitted they'd been afraid. One thanked me for forcing the issue before it happened to their kid. I didn't reply to most of them. Not because I was angry, but because I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after being on alert for too long. Late in the evening, my attorney called one last time. "They've accepted responsibility," he said. I leaned back on the couch. "In writing?" "Yes." "And the footage?" "Destroyed under supervision." "Certified." I closed my eyes and let the tension drain out of me in a slow, uneven breath. "Anything else?" I asked. "There will be penalties," he said. "Personal ones. And the HOA will be under state oversight for years." I stared at the dark ceiling. "And Linda?" A pause. "She's named individually." That was the moment something inside me finally settled. Chapter 7 wasn't loud. It wasn't satisfying in a cinematic way. There were no handcuffs or shouting matches or last-minute reversals. It was accountability arriving quietly and refusing to leave. And I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that Chapter 8 wouldn't be about winning. It would be about what happens after the watching stop. When it was finally over, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like air returning to a room that had been sealed too long. The cameras came down on a Tuesday morning. No announcement. No ceremony. Just a contractor truck, a ladder, and a man who worked quickly and avoided eye contact. I watched from my porch as each dome was unscrewed, lowered, and placed into a padded case like evidence instead of equipment. The light poles looked strange without them, bare and harmless again, as if they'd never been anything else. When the last one was gone, I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just stood there and waited for the familiar pressure to return. It didn't. The house felt like mine again. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet one. The kind you only notice when something that was wrong finally stops being wrong. I opened every blind and left them open. Sunlight spilled across the floors, unfiltered, unobserved. I made coffee and drank it slowly, standing in the kitchen exactly where I'd first waved at a red light that thought it owned me. The settlement paperwork arrived later that week. Thick, precise, coldly thorough. Admissions without apologies. Commitments without excuses. Permanent removal. Independent oversight. Financial penalties that stung without being theatrical. I signed where my attorney told me to sign and didn't linger on the numbers. Money wasn't the point. Control was. Linda never contacted me again. I heard things through the neighborhood, fragments and second-hand accounts. She'd told people she'd been misunderstood. That she'd acted in the community's best interest. That the backlash had been disproportionate. None of it mattered anymore. The record existed now, clean and permanent, immune to revision. A new HOA board was elected within a month. Different faces. Different tone. Their first action wasn't a rule change or a policy update. It was a public apology, delivered plainly, without legal padding, acknowledging that what had happened was wrong. People clapped. I didn't. Not because I was bitter, but because applause felt unnecessary. The apology wasn't for me. It was for the neighborhood, for the trust that had been treated like a renewable resource instead of something fragile. Life didn't snap back to normal all at once. It eased into it. Neighbors waved again. Conversations returned to weather and trash pickup and lawn complaints that didn't feel loaded with threat. The street exhaled. One evening, a man I barely knew stopped by while I was watering the front plant. "Hey," he said, awkward but sincere. "Thanks. For standing your ground." I nodded. I didn't plan to make a point. I just wanted my house back. He smiled faintly. Sometimes that's the point. After he left, I stood there for a while, hose running, watching water soak into the soil. The sound was grounding. Real. Unrecorded. That night, I slept with the windows open. No dreams. No sudden waking. No imagined red dots burning through the dark. Just quiet, uninterrupted rest. The thing about power is that it depends on people not pushing back. It thrives on discomfort, on silence, on the idea that resistance is more trouble than it's worth. The HOA had counted on that. They'd assumed I'd complain quietly, accept a compromise, or learn to live with being watched. They were wrong. Not because I was special. Not because I was fearless. But because privacy isn't negotiable once you understand what it's worth. Weeks later, as I walked through my living room at night, lights on, blinds open, I caught my reflection in the glass. Just me. No audience. No lens. No performance required. That was the real ending. Not the fines. Not the resignations. Not the oversight or the apologies. It was the simple, radical freedom of being alone in my own home again, knowing that no one was watching, no one was recording, and no one would ever make that mistake with me twice.